Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Robin Zander Show. I'm your host, Robin, and each episode I sit down with a peak performer in a different discipline to understand the tactics and tools that they use to accelerate performance. My guest today, I'm so excited to introduce Darren Gold, the author of the new book, Master Your Code. But the particular reason that I'm excited to share with you this interview with Darren is he is the managing partner of the Trium Group. And I've followed Trium for 10 or maybe even 15 years. It's a 22-year-old company that really exists at this interesting intersection that I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about between work and personal development, between peak performance in the workplace and improving performance and improving your own personal life at home and in all domains. Trium is in the business of providing facilitation, coaching, executive leadership for CEOs and the leadership teams of companies that I promise you have heard about. We talk a little bit about Darren's work with the CEO and the founding team at Dropbox, with the former CEO of the Home Depot, and a lot of other companies. But it stems from Trium's and Darren's personal journeys and the work that they do internally to actually fuel the long-term business needs of the professionals and executives that they work alongside. So in this interview, we talk about Darren's personal stories, about his very interesting and troubled background in childhood, and about how that led him through a variety of different paths into this domain, what Trium does, and also tactics and tools that listeners and viewers can use to improve performance in their own personal and professional lives. I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging interview with Darren Gold. Darren, thank you so much for coming on to the show and sitting down with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Really pleasure.
Yeah.
I've heard of the Trium Group for several years. I know a bunch of folks sort of from a lot of different domains who come to work for your company and stayed. So maybe we start there. And when you're meeting somebody in an elevator, walking through San Francisco or in New York, what is it that you say you do?
I still haven't figured that out. So maybe we can do it together. I had always wished there was a firm like Trium, and then I found it. So it is this sort of rare gem that exists, been around for 22 years. And I shorthand the description by saying, we sit at the intersection of strategy, execution, and human development or leadership development. And what we're really about is this fundamental belief that to do great things in the world, to make change happen in the world, it's best to start at the top of organizations. Leaders have an incredible responsibility and privilege to impact the lives of people. So if you can get in the privileged position of working with senior leaders, changing the way they think, not so much how they act. Our mission is to change the world by changing the way leaders think.
Cool.
We have an opportunity to not only do great things for that organization, but do great things in the world. And that's one way of describing it, and I usually have a different one depending on who I'm talking to. So here we are. Yeah.
I've also always struggled to answer the question, what do you do?
Yeah.
In part because I've worked in a myriad of different industries, but ultimately, and it's fun, right? It's January 2nd, 2020 today that we're sitting down. I'll always spend time in midwinter just being a little bit more internal. I do so much external in the world that just sitting by myself in my cottage with my dog and thinking about who have I been in the last year, what do I want going forward? And the phrase that came up a couple of days ago in conversation with a friend actually was self-actualization, which I hesitate to say. I've never said on camera before because it sounds so 1970s. It sounds woo-woo. And I ultimately am the opposite of woo-woo. If someone calls me an idea person, I shoot that down because I value execution so much more highly. The idea of talking for an hour versus actually getting stuff done, I much prefer getting stuff done. And I've never seen an organization change unless people were bought into that change. And it's actually, as you say, it's the person at the top or the people at the very top have to be of a mind to create the organizations they want to work in, or it doesn't happen, right? All the way up. But if the people at the top don't make that change happen, it won't work.
Yeah, well, I think it's so important to speak the language of the culture that we're living in. And we're very much in a culture of performance, right? So oftentimes that's the way I speak about Trium, which is you're a business leader, you're tasked with whatever it is, right? Increasing the bottom line, competing the competition, right? It's a performance-related conversation that we're in.
Yeah.
Underneath that performance is a level of self-mastery. If I want to perform at my highest level and therefore have my organization perform at its highest level, I have to have mastery of my own mind and body. And so
But that's so not the culture of my father's work ethic or my grandfather's work ethic. I think both of them were high performers. My grandfather sold vacuums door to door. He sold everything door to door. But my grandfather would never have said, love him dearly, he would never have said business and high performance go together.
Right. Yeah.
So you've got to use some metaphors, right? And often the one that I will use is elite athletes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will relate to that, right?
Yeah.
They're either sports fans or they were athletes or both.
Yeah.
And I say, pick your favorite sports athlete, Steph Curry, LeBron James, whoever it is. I like basketball, so I go to those two, right? They are working on their craft every single minute of every single day, whether they're actually doing something physical or they're thinking or they're eating properly or they're focused on their sleep. And this isn't a metaphor that's any new, right? I mean, it's been used before.
It's aspirational, and especially in the world today that is, entrepreneurship is hip.
Yes.
And you and I are both old enough that we remember a time in the working world when entrepreneurship was not hip.
Right.
But becoming an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs or name your business titan of choice is aspirational. And so then you link Steph Curry to, Oprah, and you're like, oh wait, Oprah is at the top of her game.
Yeah.
Or, Tony Robbins or Byron Katie, of course, who we both admire. These are business people at the top of their game who are also peak performers, and that gives me something to shoot for.
Yeah.
And so if you find the language that works for the person that you're talking to, because everybody sees the world differently.
Yeah.
That's one of the premises of our work and the work that I've done, is the doorway into a different kind of conversation about high performance. But it ultimately is, I think at least initially, it is a conversation about how do you perform at the highest level.
Nice.
Individually and organizationally, and that means action. But the big question I often ask is, what is the source of action? And that is a really interesting question, and it can get a little philosophical, but it can get very practical as well, because here we are in a world that's complex and uncertain and volatile, and a lot of people are struggling. The biggest word I hear when I talk to my clients is overwhelm.
Yep.
I said, okay, you want to perform at the highest levels in a context that's only getting more complex. What do you do? What's at the source of action? And that opens up a very interesting conversation, a conversation that you've just alluded to isn't really asked much.
Yeah.
So
two trajectories, and I want to go down both of them. First, your personal journey.
Yeah.
Because you don't get to be the CEO of the Trium Group helping the CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world and the most successful companies in the world achieve greater high performance without going through a lot of personal transformation yourself.
Yeah.
And transformation, again, is one of those words that I'm like, it's right on the edge of questionable usage because of history. And my experience, and I having read your book, Master the Code, thank you for this physical gift, but in reading it and listening to it, right, you've been through transformation yourself. So let's start there, but then I want to come back to what does Trium do and what do you do when you sit down with a client, CEO of Home Depot, right, et cetera, to help invite towards transformation in others.
Yeah.
So my own transformation, if that's what we're going to call it, growth, evolution, right, awakening, whatever word resonates for you, happened later in life for me. I went through the first almost 40 years of my life, when I talk about in my book, like on autopilot, run by a program, I say in the book, written by a 7-year-old boy. And we can talk about what that means later when we get into the book, if we do. But, and it was a program that really served me. I was very successful growing up, educationally, professionally, early professional success.
Even before the professional success, though, I think like the 7-year-old boy is interesting. I've read, and folks who will read your book or have know, but some of the stories from your childhood, like you grew up in rough LA with a father who was, it sounds like, both quite a character and also quite a challenge. Will you share a couple of those stories?
Sure. And up until probably 15, 20 years ago, I didn't even think it was noteworthy, an unusual upbringing. And I think that's probably true for most people.
Of course.
Right? You just
my
assume
parents are
that
my parents.
that's just the way the world works. But I share a number of stories in the book, and they're only at sort of scratching the surface. But I grew up with a father for most of my life, raised me as a single parent, 1-bedroom apartment in a pretty tough neighborhood in LA. He was 14 when he took to the streets, and literally took to the streets. Hustler is probably the best. He described himself as a wheeler dealer, but it was more of like a criminal hustler.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of guns in my house. I think we talked about before we started this interview. My birthday present, when I was 13, was a loaded shotgun that my dad asked me to keep by the side of my bed in case anybody broke in. He was paranoid. He believed that, we lived in a rough neighborhood, someone was gonna break in and I needed to have a gun to, defend myself. And of course, thankfully, I never did.
What's a story that you don't tell in the book, maybe that you don't tell very often, about your relationship with your father?
I'm not sure there's anything that's sort of that meaningful that I didn't share in the book. I shared underneath all of this craziness, my dad going to jail several times, was a very loving father. My dad idolized me and worshiped me and loved me unconditionally. So there was this source of strength and comfort and safety that I had amidst the chaos and uncertainty and aspects of criminality and violence that I witnessed. The one story I didn't share was he shared with me when I was a teenager that he said I had an opportunity to start in a pretty serious way dealing drugs. Like not just petty dealing drugs, but a sort of on a larger scale. And it was my love for you and my fear of ever not being with you that kept me from doing that.
Wow.
So your question just triggered that memory for me. So that's not something I shared in the book, but it was emblematic of how much my father needed me. In many respects, it was a peer-to-peer relationship. My dad was not educated. He looked to me for guidance early on. I had a very short childhood as a result.
When you're given a loaded gun at 13, you're not so much a child in the relationship.
Yeah, and then things that happened, well before then, seeing my dad taken to jail and the FBI at our door, just lots of different things. But all of it, I think, taught me a powerful lesson very early on, and that was the power of education and learning, and instilled in me this desire to learn to get ahead so that I wouldn't have to live the life that I had been living, and that when I had the opportunity to have a family of my own, I could give them something different. It also drove me to a almost maniacal focus on achievement and getting ahead. So for much of my early professional life, I was totally unconscious, not in a terrible way, I didn't do anything wrong, but not conscious of anything other than professional success, achievement. What was the next thing that I could achieve? And of course, the moment you get it, you want to achieve the next thing, right? So certainly it was my case. But that upbringing forged what I call in the book this computer program.
The set of beliefs that is your operating model.
It was my operating system, my operating model that drove me for a long time and benefited me in many ways and in many ways limited me. And it was the discovery of those limitations that was the real transformation.
I think that gets pretty close to the core of the book, which is this idea of we have models of thinking based often on childhood or significant experiences throughout life that are I think of them as beliefs, right? You talk about them as writing your own code, but in a few sentences, how would you summarize that, the essence of the book?
I offer a couple definitions at the very beginning of the book. Program, which is one of them, which is this set of safety-based subconscious beliefs, values, and rules that automatically derive your behavior but limit your results. And then I contrast that with a code, hence the title of the book, Master Your Code, which is a set of intentionally crafted, consciously crafted beliefs, values, and rules that is purposefully designed to lead to an extraordinary life. And this notion that all of us are run by a subconscious, fear-based, safety-based program born out of our early experiences, and that the key to an extraordinary life is to, number one, realize that. Number two is to then shift to a intentionally constructed code. And I argue there are essentially these 10 lines of code that matter the most. And I devote a chapter to each one of them. And I weave in my personal story and professional story as sort of a guide to how to lead an extraordinary life. Because I think that's the question everybody's asking. You know, they ask it in different ways. How can I be happy? How can I be fulfilled? How do I live on purpose? All this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like we all want to lead an extraordinary life. However you define that, the problem is we don't really have the wisdom to know how to do that. And mine was a humble attempt to offer that wisdom. Yeah.
And I think a useful one. I really enjoy in the book how you will tell a personal story. So you're talking about your father handing you the shotgun, and then the example of him choosing not to deal drugs on a larger scale because of you and because of family and because family matters. And then you will say, here's the belief that I formed in that moment, right? That I carried with me for, it sounds like 40 years.
Yeah, which I didn't even know I formed, right? Because that's the thing about beliefs. We don't know their beliefs, right? And I say that the fish swimming in the water, the two fish are swimming along, the older fish swims by and says, hey boys, how's the water? And the two younger fish say, what the hell's water? The water in our lives are these sort of beliefs that are invisible to us, that are running
every single moment of every single day.
You know, and until you begin to see the water, you know, to see the beliefs that are running you, the opportunity to be in choice about how you want to lead and live your life is pretty limited.
You talk about in the book, but we haven't spoken about together, that it was a professional turning point where you were reaching these pinnacles of success, where you were a successful CEO, where you were a venture capitalist or in private equity, and then you got fired. Yeah. It struck me as I read that it would have been so simple and is so common to, like, I've been fired, right? Like, to have a professional setback and then get back on the horse and, like, go do exactly or a variant of what you were doing before. Yeah. So how come, for me, that turning point, as we started to talk about, was, I mean, I've had several, and I've been blessed with several. I would categorize it as diagnosably depressed in middle school, right, to the point of being close to suicidal. And my parents saw that and took me out and homeschooled me for a year. Another was, as we talked about, walking into a gymnastics gym at 19 and just the world opening view of I could learn to do a backflip on a trampoline, a gymnastics giant on a high bar. Yeah. How come in that moment when you were fired and in the time that came after, you changed course so dramatically to think about seeing the water, seeing your beliefs? Yeah,
well, it didn't happen as dramatic. I mean, the books, you know, compresses things just by nature of books, right? But I did jump right back in. I was so shattered, right? This happened at a point where I thought I was like at the pinnacle of my career. And actually, it wasn't in the first draft of the book. I decided to put it in upon the advice and encouragement of a colleague who knows who she is. And I did jump right back into something that I'd been doing. I went to another private equity firm where I'd been a partner at another private equity firm and did that for a short period of time. And it was really in that intervening kind of year or two where I started to begin to question. So it took some time, right? It wasn't like it happened and then overnight I was like, wait a second, right? Eureka, right? That rarely happens. Right. It was in the kind of intervening year or two, and then a pivot in my career where I became the CEO of a company. All of that put together, I started to question, like, what am I doing? Is this really fulfilling me? Is this what I'm meant to be doing?
How old were you at that point?
I just turned 40.
And you had 3 kids, you were married?
I had 3 kids, married. You know, it was one of those moments that I began to question everything. And began to get into this body of work, right? You could call it wisdom, you could call it human potential, self-improvement, right? Philosophy, psychology. One of the catalysts was I became the CEO of a large education company. And my personal mission was to reinvent higher education. I thought that institution and every other institution was doing a terrible job of teaching. Yep. And I said, we're going to reinvent the experience in the classroom. And we're going to do it by having incredible teachers. I don't care what we're going to do, but we're going to find incredible teachers. And as my inspiration, I sat in a lot of charter schools, K through 12. Cool. And I sat in the classrooms and I was starting to say, like, okay, the difference is the teaching. I was like, wait a second, I've never taught before. And here I am as a CEO evangelizing, right, changing the experience in the classroom. So I decided to teach. I was CEO during the day and college instructor at night.
Cool.
And the class I taught, I had to bring this body of work in because I was trying to answer the question, how do you get adult learners who have been failed by and have failed at traditional institutions to become learners?
Right.
And it really required a psychological change. Carol Dweck's work around mindset is the great example, right?
Yep.
And that was my doorway into this whole world of what I call self-mastery, how to understand my mind and my body in a way that allows me to transform and do extraordinary things, because I was trying to do that with pretty underserved adults. And that was the opening for me to go, holy cow, there's this whole world I didn't even know existed. And then I started to apply it as a CEO, organizationally, and to myself, because that's where it has to start. And that was when it all opened up for me.
If you were speaking to somebody, and hopefully you are, and I'm sure do regularly, who's in that period of searching, what are some of the resources? Who are some of the people? What are some of the catalysts? What would you point people towards?
Yeah, I've always been a big reader. I'm an insatiable reader, an autodidact. One of the early books that really influenced me was a pretty unknown Jack London book called Martin Eden. And I always recommend this. People are like, no one's ever recommended that book. And it was sort of the story, semi-autobiographical, of a young man, uneducated, who learned how to learn. And so I often, I'm a big advocate of read.
Cool. And
just read some of the great books out there that will then catalyze interest, or it won't, right? There's also just great experiences people can do. There are great wisdom teachers out there, in the business context, in the personal development context, whatever's your thing, different modalities, and go experience a 3-day workshop, because there's no better teacher than an experience, right? So our work at Trium is highly experiential. We don't teach. We give people an experience of something new. Cool. And it's through that experience where real transformation happens. So I'm often, saying, hey, go to do a 3-day this, or a 4-day that, or a 2-day this. And that's usually what I recommend.
I think it's the first time I've ever walked into a management consulting firm and saw a wide open space. We maybe capture some B-roll of it later. That looks to me like a facilitation room.
Yes, it is a facilitation room. And actually we added that about 5 years ago. Realizing that we were leading a lot of offsites for our clients, usually go into third-party space, or sometimes in their offices, although not that much. Wouldn't it be great to be able to host clients here? And so we do that a lot. Cool. We have clients come in, it holds up into about 30, 35 people, and got a great outdoor deck. So it's great to be able to do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
As an event organizer, I see those, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's that is thoughtfully constructed.
Oh, great.
And again, I've never seen a consultancy that has that built in.
Yeah.
I want to go on to what Trium does, but I want to come back to this transformational moment, because certainly in my life, and we could go into it or not, but those moments, when I opened up a cafe on 3 weeks' notice with no restaurant experience, most people in my life did not know what to make of that, right?
Yeah.
When I went to Costa Rica and studied abroad for a year in high school, right? As a sophomore in high school, when none of my peers were going abroad, like, people didn't know what to make of that. And those are just the externals, right? That's not even the personal transformation. That's the reaction. But I can only imagine, and I'm not married, I don't have kids, the impact on your family and on your personal life, not to mention your professional life, of going through such a dramatic change.
Yeah, it's pretty profound. I think the key to it, for those of you that are interested and maybe even trying it, is that it has to be about your own personal journey. As soon as it becomes, well, my wife needs to get it, or my kids need to understand it, or my colleagues need to get it, or the people in my organization need to understand this, you're outside of yourself. And it's like Gandhi's famous quote, which actually isn't the quote, right? But it's been bastardized to say, be the change you want to see in the world. I really, that's an important summary of the intensely personal responsibility that this work entails.
What did your kids say? What did your wife say in the midst of, so you get fired, like, walk me through it. You walk home, you walk in the door, and it's like, I'm home, I got fired, I guess I'm gonna go back you know, a couple weeks later or whatever, but like, then as things start to bubble up in this, like, in some ways what sounds like a meltdown to finding a new path. Yeah, what was the impact on your family?
Well, for me, I've always been a provider. I mean, literally just after college, I started providing financially for my father, and still do to this day. And my wife and kids, it's sort of has been part of my identity. I talk about identity a lot in the book. So I went right back to providing. I jumped right back into something that I was onto a new business idea like within days. So my family never felt, you know, at least I don't think they did. I'm sure they did in some way, that their life was changing much. And you know, back then I wasn't as open as I am now. And so I probably masked a lot of the pain and fear I was feeling at the time so that they didn't have to feel what I felt when I was young. They feel like their life was just going on, especially my children, even for my wife. Like, don't worry, I've always had a massive amount of self-confidence. And even as shaken as I was after that event, I still exuded like, there's nothing to worry about. And by the way, you know, we were just entering the Great Recession. So people thought the world was coming to an end, and here I was, right, trying to act like as if nothing ever happened. I was careful, you know, as I was going through this sort of personal journey, though, importantly, not to like stick it in people's faces, you know, my friends and my family, and say, you ought to, and get preachy or evangelize. And this is about my own journey. And what they ended up getting was a more loving husband and a more loving father, a more conscious friend, you know, a more caring colleague. So like, while some of it can be a little jarring, and some of my friends chalked it up to, this is Darren's just next passionate project, because that's kind of who I am. It was very appealing, you know.
Because the experience that they had was of more love.
It was, and it was a mature transformation. It happened at a time in my life which was very natural, and so I had enough maturity to hold that. And I think I was blessed with some age at the time. I'm not sure it was the same. I flipped that, and I'm like, oh yeah, right. When I was 17, when I, you know, broke my neck on a trampoline at 20, right? Like, I did not have the maturity to, right? Like, the only recourse I knew was to go hide or lash out, right? Exactly. And so I like... How can you, right, at age 17, right? At age 40, hopefully...
As the provider, right, you have a little bit more...
life experience and maturity to be able to go through a kind of personal journey, pretty transformative personal journey, and handle it with kind of grace and maturity that can help others be attracted to it, not repelled by it. And I would say, you know, particularly for my wife, you know, I give her a lot of credit, because that's a pretty disconcerting change. You know, when you've got somebody you've been with for, at that time, through dating and stuff, almost 20 years, to like be on this new journey can be threatening. So, you know, I think I tried consciously and unconsciously to make it as unthreatening as possible, and to be patient with others, and most importantly, myself. So,
I like, we had Brian Robertson, the co-founder of Holacracy, on stage at Responsive Conference this last year. And it was really interesting in the world of social media and fast-paced, right? I want to take the pill, and I want to change tomorrow, and I want my journey towards a great body to be over the day after that, right? To hear him say, actually, holacracy is not perfect for everybody, right? And I have mixed feelings, both positive and negative, about holacracy personally, but like, he's saying, actually, if you want to change a large organization, expect to take 10 years, 15 years, right? And it was quite the in-depth and sophisticated interview. Again, sort of not endorsing, but also not condoning holacracy or any specific form of management. But the take home for me, and also from what you just said, is change, whether at an organizational level or personally, takes patience and takes, right? Go slowly to go smoothly, and go smoothly to go fast.
You know, I love the word mastery. You know, mastery to me connotes a life of deliberate, intentional, repetitive, like daily commitment. And I just love the image that it evokes, you know, of somebody really serious. And getting back to the earlier question, you know, this isn't something that most leaders think about, but, you know, again, the elite athlete, right? They are absolute masters of their craft. And I say the same thing with leadership. In fact, it's even more important. You have the responsibility for leading the welfare of, in many cases, thousands and thousands of people. If you're not treating it like a craft that you're dedicated to, what are you doing?
Right.
Just a little off topic, and there's a lot of luck involved. There's product market fit, right? You can be the most conscious, involved leader in the world. If you don't have luck on your side, product market fit, right? Good luck.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's just one component.
Yeah. So let's come to how Trium helps leaders of organizations all over the world reach mastery.
Yeah.
What is it that, if you're sitting down with the CEO and maybe, share some of the organizations you've had the pleasure to serve and to mentor?
Yeah. Where do we start? Is that the question?
Or who have you worked with that you're particularly proud of? And let's look at some of those stories.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work over the years with very large companies. Right now, we're working with. I'm now in my 4th year working with Dropbox, where we started, and they were well before even thinking about going public to now a public company in a very interesting place with a mission of really creating an enlightened way of working. That is their mission.
Yeah.
So they're very much in this idea of creating products that help the world work in a more enlightened way, and doing that themselves, right? So it's been a really nice opportunity to work with a young leadership team. When we started working with them, and I was coaching the founders, most, if not all, I think with the exception of one person, were first-time leaders, leading a pretty large and growing and valuable organization. And so the first step is you've got to get people introduced to this whole notion of like, oh, you mean if I want to scale and grow and transform a business, I have to scale, grow, and transform myself? Interesting. I think people can get that pretty quickly intellectually, but they're not quite sure what that means. So I really like that, because everybody wants to grow, scale, and transform a business. No one will ever argue with that, right? And if you do, maybe they're not a good client for us. Say, okay, let's start with the premise that you need to scale and grow and transform yourself. And they get that, because especially in high-tech companies, right? They're like, okay, I got to scale myself, right? Because I can't, what I was doing when we were 50 employees isn't working, that we're now at 500.
Right.
So they get the idea of scaling myself. Okay, and now we're into the question, okay, what does it mean to scale myself? Well, I got to understand the way I'm making sense of my reality. And I am totally in control of shaping my own reality. And the way I do that is through my thinking, what I believe.
Yep.
And I can have choice about every single belief I hold. And so then we just go into something specific for them that really resonates, and you try to create these kind of aha moments. For me, my first aha moment on this journey was like this massive need to be liked. I had the superpower of being likable, and it might be showing up even in this interview, right? And it was born out of a bullying incident when I came from London, England, to the San Fernando Valley, Los Angeles, where I was teased for my accent. I had to be liked.
Yep.
And that was my survival strategy. I talk about survival strategies, right? And when I first figured out that, holy cow, this likable thing wasn't who I am, but it was who I wound up being.
Yeah.
And that I had some choice. I could still be likable, but I didn't have to be obsessed about it and driven by it. It allowed me to have direct and honest conversations that I wasn't even capable of having. And it massively expanded my range of action, right? And so that I could perform at a much higher level. And so everybody, even at the highest levels of organizations, has something like that. They probably have multiple.
Oh yeah.
Right? And where does it serve you? Where's it limiting me? What would it look like to expand that belief? What kind of range of action would I have, and what kind of results would I get? And you're like, okay, now you've got a little practice with what it's like to be a master of yourself. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't it be great if you could, 10x that in every sort of dimension? Like, yeah, I want more of that. I can be extraordinary at what I do. I'm a pretty good leader, or I'm struggling as a leader, whatever it is, but I can be extraordinary if I had mastery of my own mind. And then we'll get into the body, and if we want to, in a little bit as well. You're an expert in that, right? And how am I using this thing?
Yeah.
Right? Because this is the most underutilized asset we have as a leader.
Yeah.
We never talk about physiology. When I'm doing a large talk, I often say, and it's an important offsite. People come, spend 2 days and said, who here walked into the room this morning and said, how do I optimize my physiology so that I could, create a better experience for myself and others?
Yeah.
And there's always one freak, right? That does say,
right. I learned that not by sitting in a boardroom and not by sitting at a desk.
No.
I learned that by practicing backflips, where if I, actually, interesting story. So yet another career trajectory exploration of mine was, if you have kids, so you've probably seen some of the dance movies, some of Center Stage, and there's always the narrative and the trope of an older 18-year-old guy studying alongside 12-year-olds in tutus, right? Because guys come to dance, they fall in love, but they don't have a background to dance, and so they're trying to catch up. I did that from 26 to 28 here in San Francisco at the Academy of Ballet. Shout out to Zori. They let me in because I'd never had ballet background. This was long after college, right? All of my peers were getting PhDs at this point, and I said, I want a core competency in ballet, because ballet is such a foundation of so many other physical forms of movement, especially dance, but gymnastics and almost any form of movement you could practice is positively informed by a study of ballet. So I did that for 2 years. And the humility of being, 26, of working for an amazing tech company in the Bay Area, and then from 3 to 9 p.m. 5 days a week, and from 9 to 3 p.m. on Saturdays, training alongside 12-year-olds who were much better at ballet than I was. But I'm training for 6 hours, right? What did I have for lunch today? How much sleep did I get? How am I feeling emotionally? Did I just go through a significant breakup or get in a fight with my mother? And then I went to do pirouettes, right? So a turn on one foot, right? Whole pirouette. And the difference was binary. If I could do a single, and I'm a natural turner. It's just a gift I was born with, I guess. But particularly on my right, I can just pull out double turns pretty easily. And I was working on 4. I was working on my quads, my quad pirouette. If I got less than 8 hours of sleep, I could not do more than a single. And if I got more than 8 hours of sleep, I could do 4. And it was absolutely binary.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at that everywhere in my life. And I was used to getting by on 6 hours of sleep, but to train for 6 hours and at the end of every single class to be working on my pirouettes, I wanted my quads. And I couldn't do it unless sleep was taken into account. Yeah. I can get by in so many places in my life with not enough sleep. But then you take it to that for me at the time, that peak of physical training, and sleep was the determining factor. And there's so many things like that physically that you only know when you go down a deep study of physical, because, right, we can be having an interview and we won't know the difference if we're happy or sad, if we're well rested or not, if we've had a good meal or not, right? But and the leaders of the biggest organizations in the world that you've been advising and coaching know, because to get to that level and sustain that performance over decades, right? One of the things I've been telling my team is I'm just getting started. I'm 33. I've been through a lot for 33. I've got 60 years ahead of me. I'm not even a third of the way through this life, this career, this trajectory. We're building Zander Media to be a company that I'm going to be continuing to build for the rest of my career. Yeah. And we can talk about why, because storytelling is timeless. But the folks that are the best performers, right, physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually, they're tapped in. They're on it, and they're working to improve themselves every day. Yeah. And our bodies, the influence of our bodies extend beyond ourselves, right? They really affect others, and so if we're leading other people, and we walk into a room, your physiology is right substandard. Right. Guess what happens to the other people in the room? Our central nervous systems mirror and mimic each other. Yeah. Right. We co-regulate. Yeah. And so if we want to enter a room, I often ask this question to leaders. I said, when you walk into a room, do you raise or lower the anxiety in the room? Nice. It's a very telling question. Yeah. And oftentimes leaders say, oh, I think I raised the anxiety. I say, okay, how do you think people in that room are performing? Yeah. When they're fearful and anxious. Yeah. Right? Our best parts of our brain shut down. You don't have to be a neuroscientist to understand, right, that when you're in a fearful or anxious state, your focus narrows to the things that are, potentially risky.
And our prefrontal cortex, where our best thinking occurs, gets overridden by the limbic system, which is our fight, flight, freeze response part of our brain. And so we can do some physical hacks as individual leaders around our, put aside diet, sleep, and exercise, which is actually foundational, but around our posture, our breathing, and our facial expressions, which, by the way, we don't use nearly enough of, right? Just smiling, right? To massively influence the performance of others that we're tasked to lead. So this is like, okay, you want to be, LeBron James of the corporate world. Again, I'll just use, LeBron as an example.
Metaphors work for me.
Right? Like, you got to use your body.
Yeah.
And you got to know what your body can do and can't do, and the influence it has over yourself and others.
Yeah. We're going to be winding down in 5 or 10 minutes. So I wanna talk some of the tactics and some of the changes you've seen and some of the leaders that you've coached here at Trium. So the founders of Dropbox and the leadership team at Dropbox is one. If there's other companies that you want to shout out, but what have you seen change, and what then is the impact? Because the reason that we could have just had a phone call, and I wanted to do this on video and in person, because I know and so fully believe that when we begin to change organizations at the highest level, it trickles down to the entirety of that organization. How big is Dropbox today in terms of employee size?
Over 2,000 people,
And then the users,
right.
which is millions, right?
Literally hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions. So what are some of the changes that you've seen, let's just take that example since we've been on it, of the leadership team at Dropbox as a result of, or at least ultimately as a result of the change that they've made in themselves, but in some ways because of your invitation?
Yeah, well, I think everything we've talked about has in some way impacted, I think, humbly speaking, the way that they've approached their own leadership, but also, as I mentioned, the mission of the company. Right, this notion that they had the ability to create a different kind of company. It's definitely a work in progress. It's probably a 10-year work in progress plus. So, for sure. And then different leaders have gone in sort of different areas. The one shout out I would like to just, given our limited time, is do a lot of work at Roche and Genentech. And the CEO of Genentech, who I had the opportunity to coach and work with, Bill Anderson, who's now moved up to a very senior role at Roche, about 3 years ago decided he wanted to move Genentech to a teal organization, which is, Frederick Laloux's work reinventing organizations. I can't take credit. That was his own inspiration. We came together when he had that thought, and we helped work with him and the senior team there. I think the lasting impact that we've had on him and the organization is this notion that if you want to design a more conscious organization, you have to attend to the developmental stages of the leaders of that organization, right? And so you can't just attend to structure, right? And be more agile, and everybody goes to structure.
Right? It's much easier.
It's much easier. It's external.
I take my org structure and I shake it up.
And we're going to do all these innovative things to be, to go from an orange to a teal.
Taking somebody who is no acrobat and has no experience and saying, I'm going to have you do a handstand, a one-arm handstand, by literally holding you by your ankles and dropping you with one arm on the ground, right? Like, I shudder, like I literally, viscerally object to that. But that's what we try and do with organizations is say, we're gonna fix it.
Right.
We're gonna work in more agile, smaller ways where we have less control, and we're gonna change the way hierarchy is, and all of a sudden, the way we think hasn't transformed at all. And so what Bill got very early, and what we helped that senior leadership team and extended leadership team get, was we have to go through our own developmental journey, and I would call it ego maturity. Right? If I'm going to let go of control, I have to understand my psychological makeup and transform it so that I'm not only comfortable with it, I embrace it and see the wisdom of it. Right? That is a journey in and of itself, and so we do a lot of work with organizations like that, and have that kind of impact, and then help them, have the experiences of what is it like to go through these progressions and these transformations.
Are there any habits either that you do daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, or that you recommend to leaders that you're coaching because this journey towards mastery is never complete, right? It is a lifelong journey in my experience, and I've never seen somebody that would indicate other than that. what do you do to work on yourself? What do you recommend to leaders?
Yeah, they're one and the same. So I like to say everybody, that's doing anything important in life, wants to lead an extraordinary life, has to have a daily habit. You don't have to, right? But I would highly recommend it. And I love the example Jerry Seinfeld, when he was starting out in his career, he said, I'm gonna write a new joke every single day, good or bad, but I'm writing a new joke and I'm never gonna break the chain.
Nice.
And what he meant by it is I'm never gonna miss a day.
Yep.
And so the act of doing something daily, without fail, without exception, is in and of itself the act of an extraordinary person. So I said, if you're somebody that actually does something without fail every day, you're already on the path to being extraordinary. It doesn't care what it is, that's sort of secondary. So I say, people are like, I don't have enough time. I was like, okay, well, could you set your alarm clock 10 minutes earlier than you otherwise would every morning? And I was like, of course I could, right? If I get up at 6:15, I could set it at 6:05. I said, that's what you're gonna do. It's what I do.
Yeah.
So if I need to get up at 6:15 to get to a certain appointment, I set the alarm clock. So my habit is 10 minutes, it's a reflective period. I start off with 3 things I'm grateful for. So it's a gratitude practice. I do a loving kindness meditation where I have sort of concentric circles of people in my life that I sort of do this loving kindness meditation to. I think about 3 things, I visualize 3 things that I want to accomplish in the day. So performance and action and getting stuff done, so that I'm really like embodying that. And then I end with, I think, the most powerful thing that I recommend that people do and that I've been doing without fail every single day, multiple times a day for a long time, which is my identity statement. So I think one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior is the desire to be consistent with your identity. And we all have identities, subconscious identities that oftentimes limit us.
Yep.
So I believe we can, like any belief, reconstruct our identity. And so I've done a lot of work around what is the identity that I need to have to produce the kind of results that I want to have in life.
Yep.
And I have an identity statement, and I say that every single morning, and I don't stop there. I get in the car and I scream it. So by the time I'm in the office at 8 a.m., I've said my identity statement 3 or 4 times, and I'm paying attention to my physiology, so I'm in the right emotional and energetic state to do extraordinary things, or at least to have the probability of doing extraordinary things go up. Can't guarantee results. So that's the kind of practice I really encourage people that are interested in leading or doing anything extraordinary to do, is to non-negotiable 10 minutes every single day, put whatever you want in it, gratitude, intention, identity. I think those are great things. Extend it if you want to. Start small, go bigger if you like it and want to. And the last thing I'll say is, the most important moment of any day is the first moment of consciousness, when I wake up. And I say, thank God I'm alive, and this is going to be an amazing day. And I do it with a big smile on my face. So that's how I start every day.
Well, this has been a total pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. I'm looking forward to much more conversation, but I'm glad to be doing this with you on camera.
Yeah.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for... there are so many people in organizations all over the world struggling. And I see you bridging this gap that matters between personal development and professional success, right? Like the growth of organizations around the world.
Yeah.
And this movement is just getting started. It's the reason I run both Responsive Conference and Zander Media. Seeing you as a reflection of what Trium is doing in the world. Thank you.
And thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing as well.